Today we're starting up a new section, and our new section is called Central Asia. So go ahead and write down Central Asia and then underline. So write down Central Asia and underline. So we're going to be talking about Central Asia today. Where is Central Asia? Like what area of the world I'm talking about? Well, I'm talking about a lot of Stan nations. Their names end in Stan. So the Stan nations are kind of in this area right here. So I'm talking about Central Asia. I'm talking about this area here. So what are the Stan nations? Well, they're nations such as Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Although we're not going to talk about Pakistan in this one. But that's kind of the area I'm talking about. So why do these nations all end in Stan? Like why is it Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan? Well, Stan means land of. So when I say Kazakhstan, it means land of the Kazakhs. Uzbekistan, land of the Uzbeks. Pretty simple. So it just means land of. So that's all Stan means. Go ahead and make a bullet, and we're going to write down introduction. So make a bullet and write down introduction. So we have to talk about where these Stan nations came from. Now, these Stan nations didn't exist until 1991. A lot of these nations were actually part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, let me show you a map here. So you see here, this map here with all these different numbers, all these places with numbers used to be part of the Soviet Union. So all these things here used to be part of the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union was around from the kind of early 1900s. And then it stops being a nation in 1991. Why does it stop being a nation in 1991? Well, let's write down something first here. Let's go ahead and make a 1, and we're going to write down 1. Soviet Union breakup added several more independent countries to the region. So once again, number 1. Soviet Union breakup added several more independent countries to the region. So how did the Soviet Union break up? What happened in 1991? Well, the Soviet Union had an economic collapse in 1991. When its economy collapsed, the nation broke apart into several new nations. Now, Russia is, of course, the biggest component of the Soviet Union, and they maintained Russia. So Russia is still its kind of old historical self, but then the other parts of the Russian Empire that were incorporated under the Soviet Union banner then broke apart. Okay, so historically, this area here in the pink, Russia, this is historically the area that they did control before they became the Soviet Union in the 1920s and such. And then these places kind of were incorporated in after the 1920s, but then they broke away when the Soviet Union collapsed. So yeah, so its economy collapsed in 1991, the Soviet Unions, and then all those countries broke away. There were a lot of problems going on in the Soviet Union. It wasn't just all of a sudden, economic collapse in 1991. It was kind of a slow process, but it started really the late 1980s. That's when their economy started going downhill, and then it got to 1991, and then that was pretty much it. There was also an attempted military coup in 1991 that didn't go very well for the military, and then, so economic collapse, failed military coup, all that led to the Soviet Union breaking apart. So once again, this is the map of all these numbers were places in the Soviet Union, and then they broke apart and became their own nation. So you had one nation, then become 15 in 1991. Next thing we're going to talk about is the Aral Sea. I'm going to make a bullet and write down Aral Sea. So the Aral Sea, it's been shrinking by quite a lot since the 1940s and 50s. It was a full-on sea, but it's been losing a lot of its water, a lot of its volume. It's been losing over time. So what's been happening? Well, let's first write down how much volume it's lost. So let's make a 1, and we're going to write down 90% of the sea's total volume has disappeared. So 90% of the sea's total volume has disappeared. So the sea here, the Aral Sea, has lost 90% of its total volume over the years. So it was bigger than what it was, but it has lost 90% of what it used to be. So it used to be much bigger. Well, like 10 times bigger. But it's lost about 90% of its volume. We'll talk about why in a bit. But let's first look at some pictures here of the Aral Sea. And I'll make this bigger so you can see it a bit better. So you can see in 1964, the Aral Sea looks like this. By the time we get to 1987, you see the yellow line here. That's where the Aral Sea used to be, but you can see it's smaller than that. So it's starting to shrink. In 1997, you can see it's even smaller with this gap here in this part growing even bigger. And when we get to 2002, there's a western part that's still there and the northern part. And then there's a very shallow basin here. And you can see where the Aral Sea used to be in terms of shoreline. Let me show you another graphic. So this one starts off in 2001 and it's going to go to 2014. So you can see here how that little basin is kind of disappearing. Like it comes back and then it goes away and comes back and goes away. There's still that western part and the northern part is still kind of around, and you got this little thingy up here. But for the most part, it constantly is kind of disappearing in terms of size. Let me show you some other pictures here. So because the Aral Sea shrunk kind of quickly, there were a lot of boats that were chilling out, in various harbors and so forth, because there was fishing on the Aral Sea, or, was. And yeah, the water disappeared so much that these boats are just, left out in the open. And you can see the Aral Sea's been gone for so long. You got grass and everything kind of growing here. Yeah, and these boats are just hanging out here, just sitting and rusting away. You see kind of some more boats that are rusting down there. Now, there is some fishing still in the very northern part. So in this northern part up here, there is some fishing still. So there still is some fishing, but that's all in the very northern parts. Now, there's a dead fish. So why is it that the Aral Sea, why has it been disappearing? What's the reason for that? Well, the reason for that is that the Aral Sea is disappearing because use of the rivers feeding the Aral Sea are being used for agriculture irrigation. Go ahead and make a 2. And for 2, we're going to write down use of rivers feeding the sea for agricultural irrigation. So what's happened is that in the 1960s, there was then a push in the area for people to grow cotton. Cotton requires water. Not a huge amount of water, not as much as sugarcane does or rice, but it still requires a good deal of water to grow cotton. And because of the water requirements for the cotton, the water gets diverted. So there's rivers that are feeding into this Aral Sea. Those rivers are instead diverted to farmlands, and without that water feeding into the Aral Sea, bam, it's disappeared. Not totally, but yeah, a lot of it has disappeared. There's also problems too where there was no limits on how much water people could take. So if you wanted, so you could take as much water as you wanted from the river. No requirement at all. And so obviously people took more than they needed. And because people took way more than what they needed, that's led the Aral Sea disappearing, as you can see in our pictures. And let me see, where are we running at for time? Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and actually stop there for today.